It's Friday. It's the 5th of July, 2024. On this historic day, Labour have a landslide. They have unprecedented victory, really, in terms of the number of seats gained, and we have a new government. What does that mean for property? That's what we're here to discuss. There are a few things that it means. One of the things that the Labour government have said, Angela Rayner said that they would ban Section 21 with immediate effect. That's not possible. You can't just ban it, and it will take a while for them to do it. However, they have talked about banning it within 100 days as well. So we'll see what that means. What could it mean? Well, it could mean a number of things. Number one, Section 21 will be going. That's been a clear direction of their policy, and there is no doubt they will enact that. The question is when. Within 100 days is probably optimistic unless they stay in Parliament for the summer recess. And we'll see. If that happens, there's a chance that it could happen within 100 days. And if it does, what will it mean? Well, it will mean that you can no longer serve a Section 21 notice on your tenants, but from when, we don't know. Why don't we know? Because we haven't seen the bare bones of the legislation yet. We're hopeful that it will be based on the Renters Reform Act that was lost in wash-up when Rishi called the snap election. Basically, there was a policy going through on the Renters Reform Act that had cross-party support and was widely held to be a balanced bill, which means that Section 21 would eventually be banned, but there will be other grounds which can protect landlords from tenants in the sense of rent arrears as usual, but also if a landlord wants to sell a property, there's a specific ground for that. And if a landlord wants to reoccupy the property for their own occupation, there's a specific ground for that as well. So we suspect that we'll see the Renters Reform Act bill rehashed in a new form. Will it be slightly more draconian? Will it be worse for landlords? Quite possibly, because Labour are claimed to be the party, the pro-tenant party. One of the sound bites that I picked out that kind of will annoy many landlords that have been very scrupulous and looking after their tenants for many years is this: unscrupulous landlords strangling growth is what they're trying to get rid of. Well, how many unscrupulous landlords are there strangling growth? I don't know. But certainly most of my landlords are actually looking to just gain an income from their business. And their business has considerable expenses, which are worsened by things like Section 24, the inability of landlords to offset their interest payments against their income, meaning that many landlords are already breaking even or worse, going backwards, which is why we've seen such a sell-up. Do I suspect that there'll be a larger sell-up in the wake of this? Yeah, I do think some landlords will say, actually enough already. If I'm going to be part of this unscrupulous landlord group strangling growth, then I'd rather not be. In the medium term, what do I think? Well, this is a supply and demand business. Supply, whatever the Labour Party say about they're going to increase the social sector, the supply is going to be reduced by landlords running away from things like the abolishment of Section 21 and from frankly not knowing or feeling not wanted. There are many, many landlords. 20% of the UK housing stock of rental is private landlords. And those private landlords, many of them are pensioners and are just looking at the income, but actually hold substantial equity, if not 100% equity in those properties. Now, if they feel that it's not a fair and balanced situation when it comes to renting property, they will take that money, they will put it on deposit, and they will earn an income from the interest that they get. And frankly, in today's climate, that's not vastly different from what they'd be getting if they were renting the property. So therefore, the direction of travel will be more landlords selling up. This will put greater pressure on the rental sector and will probably increase rents. That's the irony about this. Careful what you wish for. A lot of people are worried about rent controls as well. Will the Labour government bring in rent controls? We all know Sadiq Khan would like to do that. I don't think rent controls will come. I think the experience of Scotland and how it's been there, there's been a massive rent surge in Scotland. Ironically, again, careful what you wish for. Since they implemented rent controls, rents have gone up 14%. This is the exact opposite of what rent controls are supposed to prevent. And the reason it doesn't work is the moment that you say we're bringing in rent controls, every landlord increases their rent to market rate. Most landlords don't do that. Most rents are below market rate. But once they know that they're locked in and can't increase their rental in the future, then they will increase their rent to the current market rate levels. And then, of course, whenever there's a window for increase, they'll make sure that they take that opportunity to increase, knowing that that window will close. And that has led to many exiting the sector, many landlords in Scotland exiting the sector of the private rental, and also, more importantly, has led to rising rents. And this is not helping the private tenant. And I think Labour know that from the experience of Scotland, but we'll see. It could be that they bring in rent controls. But again, I wouldn't really fear them, because rent controls will have the effect of, guess what? More landlords leaving, more of an exodus in the sector. What will this do to rents? Well, it will keep them at least where they are, but probably increase them significantly. There is a chance of more draconian measures, of course. We don't know what the Labour Party have got. We do know that they've talked about things like the landlords strangling growth, and it's not good to hear. They've also talked about ending bidding wars and capping upfront payments from landlords. I think this is just a lack of understanding of how the whole system works. I mean, we don't really have bidding wars. We do have situations where more than one tenant wants a property, and on occasion, one tenant will be prepared to say, look, I'll go a little bit more in order to secure the property. If you prevent that, then it doesn't prevent rents going up, because the landlords can just quote higher figures in the first place and then possibly accept offers on those higher figures if they don't come down. I don't really see that that's anything but a soundbite, really. But in terms of Section 21, what will it mean for landlords? Well, it does depend on what the legislation specifically says. And the main point being that landlords need protections in several ways. Number one, they need Section 8 Ground 8, the ability to evict tenants on the grounds of rent arrears, because that's the main reason that landlords want rid of tenants. It's not that they want their properties back. Of course, if they're a landlord, they want the income. It's if tenants aren't paying or aren't regularly paying. And sometimes it's easier to serve the Section 21 no-fault eviction than it is the other grounds for various reasons. Nonetheless, direction of travel is Section 21 will go. It's just a question of when. When it does, there will probably be similar grounds to the Renters Reform Act which protect landlords. We certainly hope so. If it is too draconian, then expect a bigger exodus from the sector. But there will always be ways of landlords exiting the sector, because if there's not, then there will be no buy-to-let market in the UK, and that will remove 20% of rental stock from the UK market. And that's not something that any government, regardless of party and regardless of direction of travel, could afford, because tenants need homes. Homelessness is massive out there, and lower the supply, the higher the rents, and that's not going to work. Whatever they talk about house building, they haven't built enough over this government. They're not going to build enough over the next government. They don't have the money to do so, whatever they say. House building is so tightly controlled by a very small number of developers, as few as 10 big developers that control house building in the UK. And the only reason they build is for profit. Unless that changes, then we can see that the housing stock is not going to go up significantly, regardless of what you do with planning and everything else. I hope I'm wrong on that, because actually we do need new houses. We need hundreds of thousands of new houses. And if we do have a better social housing stock, this will alleviate the problem. And I would love to see that. I genuinely would. As a boy who grew up on a council estate, I know that there are people that can't afford to get onto the private ladder. And it would be great to see greater housing stock out there. But it's not the job of the private landlord to subsidise rents for the government. And you would think, wouldn't you, from the direction of travel, that that's what they want to see. And it's never going to happen, because landlords have choices. And if you make it too difficult for landlords, they will walk. Now, onto another thing that will possibly come up under Labour, the EPC ratings. We've talked now for a while about energy performance, and there is, again, talk of the energy performance certificate. They're talking about this by 2030. So 6 years on from now, they're saying that. They haven't actually mentioned a target, but there's talk of EPC rating C or B. But as we mentioned on this program many times before, the energy rating system in the UK is very flawed. And really what needs to happen is an overhaul of the actual measurement system, because it is stuff of nonsense when we look at some of our properties that are less efficient than others and yet got high ratings for various reasons. Is absolutely crazy. So that needs an overhaul. But nonetheless, EPC C or above, if you're buying a property for investment for the future right now, you should be considering that you want a C or above, or you can get it to a C or above. Because if you can't, then what will happen is, likely by 2030, if you have a property that is D or below, I'm saying C, by the way, it could be B. We don't know what the direction of travel is, but it looks like it's going to be C, because anything above that, with all the old stock we have here in the UK and particularly in London, is going to be absolutely impossible and will just mean a big exodus of landlords. We're talking a lot about exodus of landlords, but I do see that as a direction of travel for many. But yeah, EPC-C by 2030 will mean that, let's say you've got a property that will never get to the EPC rating of C, but it will get to a D and it's currently an E, then you'll be expected to spend an amount of money to move that property from the E category to the D at a minimum and prove that you've spent X amount of money. At the moment, we think that amount of money is likely to be £10,000. That could change between now and 2030. But basically what you'll need to do is prove that you've done everything you can to make your rental property as energy efficient as possible up to whatever the new rating, expected rating is. And as I say, we expect that to be a C, could be a B, time will tell. And apart from that, I think that it remains to be seen what a Labour government will mean. Can they be any worse than a Tory government? Only time will tell. I'm certainly not here to say who's better or worse, but certainly landlords will be nervous, and understandably so, given what I've said today. But I do think that in the medium term, regardless of party politics, there is no doubt it doesn't drop off demand. There is huge demand for rental property in the UK. We're still looking at a ratio of around 12 tenants for every property that comes available. And that is a massive undersupply. That's not going to change anytime soon. So can buy-to-let remain feasible and profitable? I think it can, but there will be hurdles in the way. And the one thing, the big hurdle for many landlords, of course, has been Section 24, the inability to offset the interest rates against your payments on your mortgage, interest rates against your tax bill, meaning that if you have a very high mortgage and your rent is just about breaking even with your mortgage, you're still paying tax, even though you've earned no money at all. For many landlords, that's meant going backwards, and that's why we've seen an exodus from the sector. I suspect that will continue to happen over the next few years. However, if you're a landlord with a limited company and able to offset those interest payments, then it doesn't really impact you at all. And I still believe that, for reasons already stated, that with a vast undersupply and 12 tenants for every property coming available and nowhere near the amount of new housing provision coming on board, regardless of what the Labour Party would like to do, I'm very sceptical that we'll ever supply enough council housing to actually get rid of 20% of the problem, which is what the small landlord currently provides. So that's it as far as the housing policy is concerned. As far as the housing market is concerned, we've seen a bit of a pickup over the last couple of weeks. What will be really interesting is we've got the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England meeting in August. When they meet, they'll be talking about whether to reduce interest rates. And we think this time around, we could see a reduction of 1/4 point. Now, 1/4 point on the interest rate doesn't mean that payments are going to vastly change for those on variable rates, but it will mean that fixed rates are likely to come down. We've already seen that with the swap rates. We've seen rates starting to come down, and this will be very good news. What we want to see is a direction of travel, and this will all depend on the inflation numbers, of course, but they have looked quite positive. We were within target this time around. It does depend on what happens. But remember, this is not down to Labour, Conservative, or any other party. This is independent. This is about the Monetary Policy Committee members, and they will decide on a vote as to whether interest rates will stay the same, be reduced, or increase. In my view, they will, worst case, stay the same, but likely decrease by 1/4 point. Nobody can tell you for sure, and this is not financial advice, but that's my gut feeling. But as far as the housing market's concerned, what we're finding is good experience in terms of numbers of first-time buyers registering. The middle of the market particularly, we're finding lots of people looking for the average family home. And by the average family home, I mean the 3-bedroom terraced housing seems to be where the peak of demand is. Some of the more luxury homes are struggling a little bit more in our experience. The reason they're struggling is because when you've got a home that you're already comfortable with, a luxury home is more of a whim. So if you live somewhere where your family are quite comfortable, the next move along can be not necessarily because of an area move. It might be just that you're in a financial position where you can step up the ladder and increase your investment in property. And therefore, it's one of those things that requires a lot of confidence before people go forward with. And let's hope with a reduction in interest rates, which might come, and with now certainty over which party is in government, that we might see a release of the people that are on the fence and the housing market referring back to type and having more of an inverted commas normal market, because this year's been a tough one. Everyone has expected interest rates will come down from the beginning of the year. That hasn't happened. We're now in the middle of the year. We're still finding that interest rates are relatively high. Do I ever think they're going to go back to the heady days of the 1s and 0.5%? No, I don't. I think that interest rates are likely to stay high for a long period of time, and those lovely days when we had those very low interest rates have probably gone forever. However, we should see a direction of travel which is downwards this year. Time will tell. Apart from that, with the summer holidays coming, you can expect that it's going to be a mixed bag. We find that families, particularly family housing, can struggle in July, August because a lot of people are away on holiday. So we never get quite as many people looking. But then we've got September coming up. And with September comes the mum's market, children back at school, mum having some quiet time to look around. And I say mum because we find here in Southwest London that mum tends to be the one looking for that next family home. And we know that from the emails that come through and from the conversations we have saying, I can't stand another year in this house. It's too small for us now. Kids are bigger, bikes are bigger. We've got no space for this or that. We need to get moved. And of course, then there's the other reasons such as schooling, school terms starting in September, that kind of thing. But the main reason tends to be space, and gardens tend to be a big priority for people coming, especially from smaller properties, in order to get the family home so that they can stretch out a little bit. So that's it. Historic day, new government. What will it mean? Well, I hope I've given you some perspective on where I think it will go. We suspect a few more landlords will sell up, but I don't think it's a complete disaster. Time will tell, depending on what policies are brought in by this government and how small landlords feel, because it's about sentiment as much as anything else. If small landlords feel vilified and feel like the devil incarnate because they're the awful people that are causing this housing crisis, then they will choose to exit the sector because, frankly, it's nothing to do with them. The government knows this. Politicians know this. The problem is they don't have an answer. And I'm afraid, landlords, you're an easy target. So expect more of that, but don't worry about it because there will still be good demand and the income will continue to come because there's no answer from these people. They've got all the sound bites, but no sensible answers as yet. What I've said for many years is I'd like to see someone in post, a housing minister that is cross-party elected and is in post for a period of 10 years even, so that we can get some sort of stability. What we've seen is successive housing ministers coming in, more than one a year, just about getting to grips and understanding what the housing market's about. And then a new housing minister comes along. Why? So they can blame the last housing minister for what they haven't done, I think. And so it'll be interesting to see whether we get a housing minister in place this time that will stay put and do something positive for UK housing. I certainly hope so. More provision of council housing is what we need, and a balanced approach to the private landlord, encouraging investment in that sector, because that is part of the mix. And what you really need is private landlords to stay in the sector. And if you continue vilifying landlords, then there is a chance that you lose them. And careful what you wish for. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back next week. Until then, have a fantastic week. Enjoy the football and up the England.